Good morning, everyone. Actually, good evening. Depends when you're watching this. I'm really sorry, but the plan was to give a shiur tonight, but then I realized I'm going to be out of town. I will not be back tonight, probably not even tomorrow. I tried to go by Goldberg to do this shiur. First, that he would, but Maskana, he can't do the shiur tonight. I don't know what to do. I had a suggestion for a couple of people that I should just upload the shiur and everybody can watch it at their convenience. I'm sorry for the change of plans without pre-warning. I suddenly have to, okay. I wish everybody a lot of atzlacha. We're going to be doing today Daf Nun Tes. And I hope that you manage to get clear. We're up to Daf Nun Tes and Amud Aleph, about 15-20 lines from the top by the two dots. We had a machlokas. How exactly do you put the blood on the four corners of the Mizbeach HaZohov? Yesterday we talked at great length, Machlokas of Akiva and Rabbi Yosi, at three different points. Which corner do you start from? Which direction do you go into? And finally, do you actually walk around or do you just use your hands and move over while you're standing in one position? In our Mishnah, the Mishnah brought Shittas Rabbi Eliezer. And the Gemara now is going to examine that, in fact, there's a machlokes what Rabbi Eliezer holds. Our Mishnah is going like one man to Oma of what Rabbi Eliezer holds. So let's the Gemara inside, straight for Gemara. Rabbi Eliezer oimer b'mkeimer yohimei dumechata. Mastis in man who's our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer oimer, Rabbi and Rabbi Yehuda are arguing the Shittas Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi says, Rabbi Eliezer holds, b'mkeimer yohimei dumechata. You stand in the place, you don't move, which is the same as our Mishnah. But you always go in a downward motion because we're not concerned that you'll get your sleeves dirty. The reason being, as we explained yesterday, that when you're leaning over something, you're not going to get your sleeves dirty. It's only the place where you're standing right by. I'm sorry, I said it wrong. We are concerned that you'll get your hand dirty on all three corners. You are concerned that you'll get it dirty on all three corners, except for the one which is opposite in the corner, which is the furthest away. If you're standing on the side, you're going to the furthest corner. You're standing on one corner, and you're putting up to your furthest corner. That one you can do upwards. Again, the three corners which are nearest to you is one which you're standing by, one to your right, one to your immediate left. You have to do it in a downward motion, not to get your sleeves dirty. But the furthest one away, which you're leaning over the Mizbeach, and doing that, you can do an upward motion because you won't get it dirty. The further away you are, the less likely your sleeve will get dirty as you put the blood on. All of them, you do an upward motion. Except for the one in front of him, literally. In order that his clothes should not get dirty. That means, Rabbi Yehuda and Meir are arguing with Shittas Rabbi Eliezer. They all agree that the main concern is not to get your clothes dirty. They all agree that you don't move according to Rabbi Eliezer. And they all agree that you stand in one corner. And they all agree that the corner that you're standing by, you have to be very careful not to get your clothes dirty. And that one, you have to be careful to do it in the downward motion, not to get it dirty. And they all agree that the one furthest away, that we're not concerned you're going to get dirty. The only question is about the two corners to your right and to your left, to your immediate right and left. According to one man Doma, we are concerned you'll get it dirty. According to one man Doma, you're not concerned you're going to get it dirty. In our Mishnah, if you look carefully in our Mishnah, it says that we're not concerned you'll get dirty except for the one which is right next to you. So therefore, our Mishnah, which says like that, is like Rabbi Yehuda, who says the same thing about Rabbi Eliezer. That only the one that you're right next to was concerned that you'll get dirty. The rest of them were sure that since it's far away from you, you won't get dirty. Let's just explain this once more. When you're standing very close to something and you put the blood in an upward motion, the blood then drips down onto the sleeve and that's no good. But when you're far away, as you lean over to put the blood, it's not a problem because then the blood will not drip onto the sleeve. The Mishnah says that after you've done 4 on the 4 corners, then you do 7 on that Tahori Shel Mizbeach. Yesterday we explained Tahori Shel Mizbeach means that on the actual top of the Mizbeach. But this actually is a machlokes in the Gemara, as we'll see now. Here's the minimum tahor shel mizbeach, and the tahor shel mizbeach you sprinkle. My tahor. What does it mean tahor? Halfway up the mizbeach, not like we explained yesterday on top of the mizbeach, but rather the mizbeach was 2 amos high. You stand back from the mizbeach and you sprinkle towards the wall of the mizbeach and you hit the middle of the mizbeach. Now, how does the word tahor come to mean the middle? That when we talk about the day being bright, tahor means brightness, clarity. When is the sun most clear? The middle of the day. So tahor shel mizbeach means the clarity of the day, the clarity of the mizbeach, which is the middle of the day. Meisvei says, well, that's not true. Because when he sprinkles on his mizbeach, he makes sure to move away the ashes. Not the coals. He moves the coals from one side to the other. He makes a clear space on top of the mizbeach. So we see clearly he didn't sprinkle on the wall of the mizbeach, but rather on the actual top of the mizbeach. He would reveal the top of the mizbeach. And now the question is, how does tahor shel mizbeach ever come to mean the top of the mizbeach? The word toya can also mean the place where you can see it most openly, meaning the place where it is most revealed. So tahor shel mizbeach, it's referring there to Matan Torah, that the Klal Yisrael were able to see the vision of Hashem and the tremendous clarity. So over here, we're talking about where the mizbeach has been cleared. Where's the mizbeach cleared? That's the top of the mizbeach. You move the ashes and the coals away, and on top of the mizbeach, you sprinkle 7 times. Now, which side? Mizbeach was an amo by an amo, which is about 60 centimeters by 60 centimeters. Do you sprinkle on the right side or the left side? Now, we've had the machlokes again and again. How many curtains the Kodesh HaKadoshim had? 1 or 2? If it only had 1, you came out of the north. If it had 2, you came out of the south. So therefore, the machlokes as to which side of the mizbeach is actually the opposite of which side you come out of Kodesh HaKadoshim. And why would that be? The reason is, when you come out of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, if you come out of the north, if you remember yesterday we said, then you start on the northern corner. And you do the 4 corners and you finish on the southern side. If you come out of the southern side, then you start from the south, and you do the 4 corners, and you reach the north. So whichever side you start from, you're going to then finish the 4 corners on the other side. Once you're finished, then you sprinkle. Once you finish putting on the 4 corners, then you sprinkle 7 times on top of the mizbeach. So whichever side you start from, you're going to sprinkle on the other side, because you're always going to sprinkle when you finish putting on the 4 corners. So let's see the Gemara inside, second line of the wide lines. You put it on the northern side. And you put it on the southern side. If you remember, Rabbi, we said a few times, he's the one who holds there's only 1 curtain. 1 curtain means the entrance was to the north. If the entrance is to the north, you come out of the mizbeach, you come out of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, you stand in front of the mizbeach, and you start on the northern corner. You start on the northern corner, you do the northeast, the northwest, then southwest, and then southeast. So where are you finishing in the southeast? Once you finish in southeast, then you do the 7 sprinkling. And the more experience inside, so in fact, it's a basic shitose, like we've said many times, the basic holds there's only 1 curtain. Says the Gemara, everybody agrees, where you finish the 4 corners, that's where you put it on the roof. Meaning that first you do the 4 corners, and then you put it on the roof. And from the place that you finish the corners, that is where you put it on the roof. Says, well, my Tama, who says maybe you should finish on the 4 corners and then move over to the other side of his beach and put it on there. Says, you should purify it and make it Kodesh. By putting on the 4 corners, made a Kedusha. And therefore, by putting the 7 sprinkling, that's the Tiawi. So the Torah puts the 2 words together to teach us that where you do one, you should do the other. So therefore, when you finish the 4 corners, that's what you do. In fact, we come out a few different arguments. If you remember, we had one argument about how you walked into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Did you walk past the Menorah? Did you walk past the Shulchan? We had another machlokes which corner he starts from, and now we have another machlokes where he puts the sprinkle on top of the mizbeach. All these machlokes all boil down to the one question: was the 1 curtain, the 2 curtains, the Kodesh HaKadoshim? Now, our mission then continues and says the leftover blood of the chatos of Yom Kippur went on the western base. Shiur Adam Yishuv which was Bachachitze. Domakro. You should pour out all the blood. V'chinofik, when you come out of the Beis Hamikdash, the Beis Hamikdash is west. You come out towards the east. When you come out towards the east, you're always going to come into and meet the Mizbeach on the western side. I was going to get a picture of this. Sorry for the delay, so here. It's a very straightforward thing, but it's kedai to get the picture clear. You come out to the Beis Hamikdash here, you did sprinkling over here, and now you want to put it on the Yesod. This is now the western side of the Mizbeach, this is the eastern side, this is the northern, this is the south. If you're coming out from the Beis Hamikdash, the first Yesod you're going to meet is the western side. So that first one you meet, that's what you should do. The first one you meet, that's the one you hit, and therefore you go for the western base of the Mizbeach. As you see, when you come out of the Mizbeach, you hit the western side. Many of the Rishonim are very, very upset with this, they very struggle with this Gemara, because the Gemara says, the reason is, because that's the first one you meet. The Rishonim say it's nothing to do with that. In fact, if you read the pasuk very carefully, the pasuk says, listen to the words of the pasuk. There's kol adam, the leftover blood upon. Yishpoich el yisoid mizbach ha'olah. You should pour on the base of mizbach ha'olah. Asher pesach ha'olah. The base, which is by the entrance. Of which four sides is by the entrance? The western side, obviously. So there's nothing to do with the fact that it's the first one he met. But rather it's to do with the fact that the pasuk clearly says, do it on the western side. And because of that, there are some who miss out those 5 words, and they say you mustn't read those words. If you look at the Tosfos Shonim by me, it's the second bottom line. So he asks it and he leaves it shver, and some people will change the gears. So that's referring to the Chatos of Yom Kippur. The Chatos of Yom Kippur went on the western base. But all other chatois, all chatois hachitzonius, went on the southern base. The pasuk there says Yisod HaMizbeach. You should put into the Yisod HaMizbeach. That's referring to the southern base. Atom is saying that's the southern base. Maybe it's the western base. Almost you might you do the first one, the one which is closer. That means the Torah in 2 places says, pour out the blood on the base. One by a Chatos of Yom Kippur, and one by the Chatos HaChitzoni. Now, one we do on the southern, and one we do on the western. The Gemara explains that the reason is because we're learning it from each other. Just like the one on the Mizbeach Beis Hamikdash, you go to the first base you meet. Also, we here, on the Chatos HaChitzoni, you'd sprinkle the blood on the 4 corners and you'd walk down the ramp. When you've come down the ramp, you see very clearly, which base are you going to hit first? The answer is the base which you're closest to is the southern one, because on the other side, there wasn't actually a base altogether. The first one was this base, that's the closest to the end of the ramp. Just like when you're in Kippur, the Torah says that you should pour it out on the base of this back, it means the one which is the first, the closest. So also over here, when you pour out from the Chatos HaChitzoni, you should do for the closest. Now, here we've got Machlokas. Tanya, all chatois, either ones of Yom Kippur or the ones of Chatos HaChitzoni, you do on the western base. Yomi always do on the southern base. So in fact, we have 3 different shittas. 3 different shittas about what we do. Our Mishnah holds, and that's the Mishnah we should say every day in the Yom Kippur. Our Mishnah holds that the Chatos of Yom Kippur goes on the western base, the western Yesod, and the Chatos HaChitzoni goes on the southern Yesod. That's what our Mishnah holds. And that's what Mishnah Zvachim holds. But in fact, there are 2 Tanoim that disagree. One Tana, that is Rabbi Shmuel, says always on the west, and Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai always says on the south. So Shmuel says, let's try and work out what's the logic of these 2 Tanoim. Bishnem Rabbi Shmuel, we learn the one which the Torah doesn't tell us, the one the Torah does tell us. Let's listen very carefully. It's a big shmaka cheshbon. The Torah told us by the Chatos of Yom Kippur, the first one you meet, which is Pesach or Moed, by the entrance of the Moed, which we said is the west. We said that when you come off the Chatos HaChitzoni off the ramp, you go for the first one you meet, just like you do by Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, the first one that you find, you come across is the western. When you go off on Mizbeach HaChitzon, the first one that you're going to meet is the southern. So therefore there we do west and here we do south. Says the Gemara that Rabbi Shmuel says, no, your comparison is incorrect. You're comparing, just like Yom Kippur is the first one that you meet, so too the first one on the Chattas HaChitzon is the first one you meet. I'll say two different comparisons. Just like Yom Kippur it's the west, so too the rest of the year it's the west. That means both Rabbi Shmuel and the Tana of our Mishnah agree that we are learning the normal Chattas HaChitzoni from the Chattas of Yom Kippur. The only question is how to learn it. Rabbi Shmuel says, just like there it's west, also here it's west. We say no. Just like there it's the first one you meet, so too over here it's the first one you meet. Says the more. We've had the machlokas before. Exactly where was the Mizbeach in the Azor? That means we know that it was closer to the southern side, but exactly where? Rabbi Shimon Yochai holds that when you came out of the Beis Hamikdash, what happened was the Mizbeach was a bit stretched in that direction. And what happened was when you came out of the Beis Hamikdash, you would only meet the southern one, you wouldn't meet the western one at all. If you can imagine the Mizbeach being pulled more in that direction. And when you come out of the Beis Hamikdash, you would be past the Mizbeach, you would be after the Mizbeach, and therefore what you'd only be up to the southern mount. So therefore, the southern base. So therefore, since he held you'd be by the southern base, therefore that is why you would go to the southern side and not to the west, not to the... Those who've got art school actually will have a picture of it. In this booklet, they did not give a picture, so I'll just explain it once more, just to make it very, very clear. When you come out of the Beis Hamikdash, normally you would meet the western base of the Mizbeach first. That's the normal way. According to Shimon Yochai, the Mizbeach was actually much further to the north. Since Mizbeach was to the north, when you came out, you were after the Mizbeach. You were just after the Mizbeach. If you were just after the Mizbeach, you would reach the base of the southern side first. If you picture Mizbeach being over here, and you come out, you won't reach the west of this side, you'll reach this side. And therefore he held that's the Pesach Oil moment. So we have three shittas very, very briefly. Shmuel says you always do west, because since by the Beis Hamikdash and Yom Kippur, it says the first one you meet, and that's the one which is Yom Kippur, which is west, so to always we do west. We say that our Mishnah and Mishnah Zvachim says on Yom Kippur you do west, because it says Pesach Ol Moed, but the rest of the year you do south, because just like Yom Kippur you do the first one you meet, also here you do the first one you meet, and the Mizbeach HaChitzon, the first one you meet is the south. Shimon Yochai says you always do south. The reason you always do south is because he held the Mizbeach was much further to the north, and therefore the entrance of the Beis Hamikdash, you only met the southern side of the Mizbeach, and therefore that's the Yisod that you met first. Told Rabbi Shmuel, but Rabbi Shimon Yochai. In the Beis Hamikdash of Rabbi Shimon Yochai, they quoted Rabbi Shmuel, again, there was Machlikas of Shmuel and Shimon Yochai. But in Rabbi Shimon Yochai's Beis Hamikdash, when they would quote Rabbi Shmuel, they would quote Rabbi Shmuel saying, like Rabbi Shimon Yochai. The way to remember this, Mashchu Gava Legava. The Talmidim of Shimon Yochai's Beis Hamikdash preferred that everybody should hold like Rabbi Shimon Yochai. So when they quoted Rabbi Shmuel, they quoted him as the same as Rabbi Shimon Yochai. So imagine, for example, you've got Machlikas between the Shach and the Taz. So the Beis Hamikdash of the Shach, they would say that the Taz held like the Shach. So that's exactly what happened over here. In the Beis Hamikdash of Shimon Yochai, they said that Shmuel really holds of them. Now, the Mishnah says that after you pulled out the blood, we saw the picture yesterday, we'll show the picture again now, is that what happened was you'd pour out all the blood, it would go into a hole into the floor, it would then get swept away by a stream, and that stream would then go, here's three other pictures very, very briefly. This is our Mishnah talking about the Mizbeach and Yom Kippur, you're doing it on the western side. This is a Chattas Chitzoni, the normal outside Chattas doing it on the southern side. And then the Mishnah says it would get mixed up in the Amok, which is a nice picture over here, quite a nice picture. As you can see, underneath the floor is like a stream of water. The blood gets swept into this stream and it goes into the valley. And then what you would do with it is sell it to the gardens. If a person gets pleasure from the blood without paying, he's over Me'ila Divrei Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon hold his Me'ila. There's no Me'ila on blood. Top of the New Testament Beis, a very, very short Amud, a very easy Amud. Ad can we plead with Rabbanon. The whole machlekes is whether there's an ilim to Rabbanon. Everybody agrees there's no me'ila on blood. That means, if Chas v'shalom, a person would go to Beis Mikdash, even a kohen, and take for himself, for example, some of the meat which is supposed to go on the mizbeach and eat it, he's over on me'ila. He's being nenem in a hekdesh. You're not allowed to. If a person takes anything which belongs to the Beis Mikdash and enjoys it and eats it, he's chayav me'ila. He has to be a korban. It's on a terrible level. There's one exception: blood. If you go to the Beis Mikdash and there's blood all over the place, and you take the blood and use it for your benefit, what benefit could you have? You could drink it if you're thirsty. Chas v'shalom, you'd be over the lav of eating blood. But we're talking about, never mind the issa of eating blood. We're talking about the issa of me'ila. You could eat it, you could fertilize a flower plot, whatever it may be. Then you're not over min hatayra on me'ila. The shaila is only, are you over midrabanon on me'ila? That's the shaila. Why should you not be over on me'ila min hatayra if you enjoy blood? The Gemara now brings 3 drashas. They all come from the same pasuk, which basically teaches us 3 drashas that blood is different to all other things. I'm going to read the pasuk first, and then we'll see the 3 drashas. The pasuk says, the soul of a person, the soul of a flesh, is in the blood. But in the sativ lochem al mizbeach, I gave it to you on the mizbeach, lechaper nafshesechem, ki adam hu banefesh echaper. The dam is in the nefesh echaper. The blood atones for the nefesh. There are 3 words in this pasuk which are not 100% needed. One is vaninosativ lochem. I gave it to you. Who else did give it to you? Of course, it's you to put on the mizbeach. To you means it's yours. There's no samila. Alternatively, the next one, lechaper nafshesechem. That's not an extra word, but lechaper means that it's only for atoning, not for meila. And finally, the pasuk is kadam hu, the blood it. Why do you have to say the it? The word hu is spare to tell you it is it. It's got its certain halachas which are excluded from blood. So God says, let's see, we're up to the second line on the Testament base from the top. It's yours. Since it's yours, there's no meila. It's for atoning. There's no meila. It means it should stay in its own status. The status doesn't change. And we say, just like the rules of the blood before kapor or after, the same as after kapor. Just like after kapor, there's no din meila. Why is no din meila? Because you've already put on this beach. That is our halacha. Then whenever you've done whatever you need to do to a korban, you've done your shchit, whatever it is, you've done everything that needs to be done, there's no meila. For example, let's say you take a piece of meat for a korban, and you burn it on this beach until it turns into ashes. In those days, they used to use ashes for soap. If you take ashes from the mizbeach as soap, then, except for the Tumas Hadeshan, ashes, you are not over meila. Why not over meila? Because you've done everything possible to this korban. There's nothing left to be done to it. So the blood, once it's sprinkled on the mizbeach, of course there's no meila. The shaila is the meila on blood before you sprinkled on the mizbeach. Says more, who tells you there isn't? Says the Gemara, let's say the other way around. The word who doesn't teach you an exclusion so much. The word who just tells you that the status is unchanged. Meaning, just like after kapor there's no meila, also before kapor there's no meila. But you could just as easily argue the other way around. You should say like this. La'achar kapor, lifnei kapor. After kapor is just like before kapor. Man, lifnei kapor yesh b'meila. Just like before kapor there is meila. After kapor yesh b'meila. The Torah says the word who. Who means let it stay with the same principles. Well, if you're going to stay with the same principles, we could argue 2 ways around. Either just like after kapor there's no meila, also before kapor there's no meila, or the other way around. Just like before kapor there is meila, also after kapor there is meila. Since you do not know which way around, who told you there's no meila? Let's be machmir and say there's always this meila. Answers the Gemara, there's nothing which you've done the mitzvah that you're supposed to be doing to it, and you should still be chayav meila. And not by Tumas Hadesh, taking the ashes off the mizbeach, where that ashes which you take off the mizbeach, there is meila. Why? Because the pasuk says about those ashes, pasuk is like this. You should take the ashes which was consumed on Mizbeach V'somoy eitz ha-mizbeach. You should place it by the Mizbeach. The Torah, by telling us place it on the Mizbeach, the Torah is teaching us that there's actually something that you still need to do. What is that you need to do? You need to put it by the Mizbeach. So the Torah is actually saying to you that there's still Me'ilah because you still need to put it by the Mizbeach. Answers the Gemara, B'shud Avatuma Sadesh, top of Samach Amud Aleph, top line. B'shud Avatuma Sadesh, no big day, Kuhuna, Shteik Suvin Aboyim Ke'echot. V'chol Shteik Suvin Aboyim Ke'echot, Ein Melamdin. When you have two psukim teaching us the same principle, we do not learn anything from them. Let's get it very clear, and let's explain the simple rationale, the simple reasoning behind this idea. Normally, if I tell you a principle, and I say to you, for example, that the blood, or let's take a different example, the Tumas HaDesha, you've done the mitzvah, and it's still Me'ilah. If the Torah would have said that principle in only one place, logically you would have said that just like the Torah says it there, it's likely to be in all cases. If the Torah tells it to us in two separate places, what the Torah is telling us that this is a rule for those two places and those two places only. Because if it would be true that you could learn from each of these places, why does the Torah need to say it twice? I'll give an example. It's very important. This halacha shtei ksuvim b'nei landin comes up a very lot in Shas. If I say that I've got a class and I say Reuven and Shimon are allowed to go out, I'm obviously only meaning Reuven and Shimon. Because if I also mean Levi and Yehuda, I don't need to say, well, you could infer from one the others, I should just say Reuven can go out of the class. And everybody can say, well, if Reuven can go out of the class, let's say, for example, I say, anytime Reuven asks me, I need to go to the bathroom during the lesson. So I say, whatever you do the bathroom, you don't need to ask, just go out. So then what happens is, everybody can infer, it's logical that if he gets such dispensation, the rest of the class should get the same dispensation. But if I say, Reuven and Shimon, you don't need to ask, and you can go out of the class without asking whenever you need to go. So then obviously I mean only Reuven and Shimon, because if everybody else was inferred, why did it say Reuven and Shimon? So whenever the Torah tells us the same halacha in two separate places, we can be sure that it's only those two places. And therefore, let's summarize. The Torah says that big day kahuna, there's Me'ilah after you've used them. And the Torah says that Tumas HaDeshen is Me'ilah after you've taken off the Mizbeach. So those are the two exceptions to the rule, and we never learn from them into other places, because if we did, we wouldn't need to have two places telling us the same halacha. And therefore, because of that, we don't learn it to other places. And because we don't learn it to other places, blood, which you put on the Mizbeach, and you've already done the atonement, you've done whatever you could possibly do to the blood, there's no Me'ilah. If there's no Me'ilah after Kappah, there's no Me'ilah before Kappah, because that we learn from the word Hu. Okay, so we're up to the different teachers. We're up to the third line of the Samach Amud Aleph. I do not know about tomorrow what will be, whether I'll be uploading the Shiur, or whether by Goldberg, if he can manage, I'm going to ask him if he can manage, maybe he'll do it, or maybe I'll be back and then I will do it. One, hopefully there'll be some, I'll try to make sure that there'll be a Shiur. I'm sorry for the, but at least we managed to get a Shiur. It's a shortish daf, and there's a lot of you say this, so if it gets it clear. Any questions, you can always feel free to call the text.